You're listening to No Plot, Only Lore, a podcast about games and the tables we play them at. Your DMs tonight and every night are Josh and Chris. You can find us on all podcast platforms or check us out at noplotonlylore.com. If you like what you hear today, please rate and review the show and share it with everyone you've ever met. Welcome back to No Plot, Only Lore, this week brought to you by The Watchful Eye. Located in the lovely hamlet of Esbar, The Watchful Eye is your inn with the best perpetual stew this side of Weymouth. Use discount code NOPELOL for 50% off your first bowl of perpetual stew. While you're in town, make sure to check out the notable sword crafting by local blacksmith Quirrell. He had a great life as an adventurer and has now settled down and produced custom, bespoke weapons for all of your needs. His name again, Quirrell. Check out his shop, located just down the street from the small shrine to Helm, where Lord Hazon will take care of all of your wounds as well. Again, thank you. Use discount code NOPELOL at The Watchful Eye for 50% off your first bowl of perpetual stew.
I have always loved me a perpetual stew.
I think they are something that should be brought back, and modern quote-unquote health codes have really just robbed us of one of our coolest cultural legacies.
Like there's an interesting flavor that you get from cooking a thing for more than a day.
Yeah.
Right? Like we all love a chili, right? Like you cook a good chili and it should be cooked for like a couple of days.
Yeah.
Right? But
the longer something cooks, the better it gets.
That, I think, is the scientific conclusion that we can come from this. It's just like, if you cook it longer, it tastes better.
And also, it's
steak.
Probably healthier. See whatever. See the thing I just made up.
Yeah. Steak. The longer you cook it, the better it tastes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you like yours extra well done.
If mine could be like mistaken for material by Doc Martin himself, then yeah, that's my ideal steak.
Yeah, like a really dark leather. Perfect. So I've been reading a weird book.
Don't you always?
Usually, yeah. But this one isn't like a progression fantasy book. This is actually a book that I read when I was a kid. I'm reading it again for a project. It's called The Architect of Sleep by Stephen R. Boyett.
Okay.
And it is a portal fantasy from before they were popular. Like, it was written in 1987. So, like, it isn't, like, typical weeaboo isekai stuff.
Yeah, of course.
The main character goes spelunking and gets into a bit of a tight squeeze, and when he comes out of the cave, he is in a world where the dominant species is humanoid raccoons.
Okay.
And the humanoid raccoons are intelligent and have very advanced politics. Like the whole thing has a technology level somewhere between like First Nations North America and medieval Europe.
Oh, okay.
And the world building is absolutely the standout of this book. Right? Like the raccoons don't speak. They don't talk. They use sign language because they have very defined hands.
Okay. Makes sense.
Right. When they do vocalize, it's like they do trilling, the same way that like actual raccoons do to like get the attention of other raccoons to be able to sign to them.
Right.
And so there's a bunch of stuff that comes out of just that decision, right? The decision that the raccoons don't vocalize often has things like when they are in a crowd watching a sporting spectacle, instead of hearing cheering, you just see a wave of moving hands.
Oh, like the wave? At our sporting spectacles?
Yeah, that, except like expressive and linguistic.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like the wave is very expressive.
It's not super linguistic, though.
No, that's true. All it communicates is I am part of a crowd.
Yes. I have added my arms to this group movement.
Yeah.
Hooray.
Also, I'm having fun.
Yeah. Yeah, but that got me thinking about world building in general, and there's a bunch of stuff from the world building that I think is really ingenious in this book. So like the language thing is absolutely one of them. And there's like a few bits of social interaction that get weird because of it. Right? Like the main character smiles and everybody backs off.
Oh, because in the animal world, showing your teeth is a sign of aggression.
Yeah, he's baring his teeth, and so if the big, gross, hairless ape is smiling at you, that means it's going to attack.
Right.
Right. He laughs, and again, like everybody is kind of shocked because the raccoons don't laugh; they flutter their hands to show amusement.
Wait, they do jazz hands for?
It's more like a wave, but yeah, basically.
Imagine being on stage at a comedy night and you see jazz hands in the crowd. You're like, I guess I'm doing well.
Well, imagine being in like on a stage at a comedy night and you crack a joke and there's just silence, like the sound of light fluttering through the crowd. Like one, you're assuming you're bombing.
Yeah.
And two, like the feedback that you're getting is going to be all visual. So like in their culture, I'm assuming that if you wanted to do a comedy night, you would have to turn the lights on in the crowd so that the comedian could see you and your reaction.
Hold on. This is something I've thought about before, but like in this particular context, how do you have stand-up comedy in a culture that like you can't set up jokes? Like,
well, I mean, you can still tell a joke in sign language,
I guess, but like what? Okay, so with these little raccoons, what do they have a written language?
Yeah, they have a written language.
Is it like English, or
That's
like
more like Chinese?
Okay, then
it's very pictographic because like their entire language is very visual.
Right, and that's so this is just like me being a comedy nerd. And this is something that like I've talked with other comedians and stuff about, is just the fact that like weirdly enough, stand-up comedy is not like exclusive to English-speaking countries, but that's where it primarily resides. Because of like linguistic problems. Like there's other countries that have stand-up comedy, but they don't work in the same way that like anything resembling modern stand-up does.
Interesting.
Yeah, because like stand-up here has evolved from just like a guy on stage telling some jokes to a whole other art form now with its own variants that are like different subtypes and styles of comedy. Like you've got guys who are a lot more story based, but I guess like at its core, the roots of this whole thing come down to subversion of expectation. So like, how do you do that in that language? And so that's something that like I'm just personally curious about, is like, does this largely somatically articulated language have the capacity, not to say it doesn't have the capacity, but how does it handle subversion of expectation? Like what is the setup and what is the punchline,
That actually, there was a video that I was watching recently, and it was TikTok, so don't take this as like scientific research or anything. But he was talking about the differences in the way that languages talk about sound.
Okay.
And how those linguistic differences impact the way that people experience music.
Right.
So for English speakers, all of our discussion about music is related to height.
Mm.
right? So like notes are either low or they are high.
Right.
But there are languages where instead sounds are either thick or they're thin.
Right.
Right. And there was another one that he said it was I can't remember what it was. But yeah, like the thick versus thin, the tall versus
Yeah.
low, like the high versus low, changes the way that we experience and anticipate music.
Right.
And the tones that are related to one another.
Yeah.
So I assume that there would be something similar in a purely somatic language.
Right.
Where, like, because ASL, like, people tell jokes in ASL.
Right, but those jokes are based on English because ASL is just mimicking English with a different way of communicating the core of the language structure.
Actually, it's not.
Well, it's in a lot of... Hold on.
No, the ASL is its own language. It has its own grammatical structure. It has, like the signs are based on words, and like you spell things out in English with the hand spelling, but the grammatical structure of sign language is completely different from modern English.
I want to take a deeper dive on that at some other point because this podcast is about Dungeons and Dragons and not comedy.
And you know what? It's also not about American Sign Language. So I think that is a sidebar for you and I.
Given that neither of us are deaf speakers of sign.
Yeah. But world building. So yeah, like the comedy aspect. And that's part of what I really loved about this book is that it does make me think things about what the world would be like if everyone signed instead of speaking.
Sure.
Right? Like, nobody can talk in the dark.
No.
If you want to indicate that you are done talking, you can cross your arms.
Right.
Right? And that could be seen as being very rude, depending on like who you were talking to or how. But there were other like bits of like raccoon biology and behavior that were included. So like raccoons have better night vision than we do. And so when the sun goes down and the human main character can no longer see, they don't turn lights on yet because it isn't dark for them.
Right. Well, so, that just sends me spiraling with the idea. Like, not only are you talking about redefining how communication happens based on, not being able to see in the dark and stuff like that, but like you have to, again, do things that are very specific to raccoons, not just like any old creature that, can't talk. Right? Like raccoons have their own thing. Yeah. Oh, it's so complex.
It is, and I love it. And I'm trying to figure out what I did. There we go. The towns are all a little too short because the raccoons are on average about 5 feet tall.
The big raccoons.
They are very big raccoons, and they have like short stunted tails for raccoons. Like it's an evolved species that evolved in a similar way to humans.
Right. It's closer to rocket than raccoon.
Yeah, like a tall rocket.
Yeah.
Who only speaks in sign language.
Yeah. This analogy.
And one of my favorite scenes recently was the main character meets a raccoon who kind of takes him under her wing and is like protecting him and kind of treats him like a pet for a large part of it. And she keeps trying to feed him eggs, and he keeps refusing them because they're raw.
Oh. Buddy, just take the eggs and cook them. What's your problem?
Well, he does that, and the first time that he does it, the innkeeper of the inn that they're staying at woofs her cookies. Right? She cannot believe how disgusting it is that this guy cooked eggs.
Well, that's her problem.
But yeah, like the whole thing feels very like lived in and very internally consistent in ways that I was not expecting from Silly Raccoon Book. Like, again, I read this book when I was a kid, and and I have had some experiences rereading books that I read as a kid and having them be very, very different from what I recalled. And this one really held up. And so it got me thinking about world building and how we do that.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that world sounds like there's only one way to kind of like. It seems like someone has spent like a good chunk of their life just inhabiting this world internally, and finally like got it onto page. And I don't know if it's like.
My understanding is that the author actually lived with a raccoon for a while.
Jesus.
No, it wasn't like he was doing research for it or anything. It's
no,
that,
he was just for fun, with a guy who for had love of the
raccoon.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, he knew a raccoon when he was a kid and like took those experiences and put them into this book. He even named the main raccoon character after the raccoon that he lived with, is my understanding. I could be wrong about that.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, but world building. So you don't do a lot of like your own settings.
I've done variations on my own setting, and I have inhabited a couple of custom settings, before. But as a rule, I don't want to make one setting and stay in there all the time. I'm kind of fine with the variability and the variation that's published already. I don't have some grand idea that I need to get onto the page about a really cool, unique world. So no, I like to tinker and toy with ideas and throw ideas out there for maybe like individual races, but still operating within the existing framework of like whether it's the Forgotten Realms or Dark Sun or Eberron.
Right. Well, one of the things that I was thinking about in relation to world building for you and for players who prefer to work within the confines of like published, established settings, is that like world building doesn't start and stop with the creation of a setting, right? Like we're always world building. Every time we sit down to play, every detail that you include, every detail that you exclude from your descriptions of a place or a thing or a person is world building.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are including or like creating detail within that world that is going to be used later in the understanding of the players.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like, by that definition, I've definitely done some serious participation in world building. I mean, I think I've told you the story of my first character in a persistent game that, I basically rewrote how Wardens and Goliaths worked in that world, because it was a custom world, but, I put some twists on how their culture expressed itself, right? And, even in the game we're in now, I'm not on my first character, and that character's become part of the world building for that setting because, he's passed on and has a legacy, and now he's part of the fabric of what's going on there.
One of my earlier games, so like I've been playing since I was like 8 years old, so not like that early, but in high school, we were playing a game, and this was the first time that I had been playing with a group that wasn't just like me and my best friend and his sister.
Right.
And so I created a character, and then I spent days writing by hand the entire backstory of a fictional nation that I had come up with for this character to be from.
Right.
And then I presented that to my DM because I didn't know that was a dick move yet. So I handed him this like portfolio about a setting section that didn't exist in the game yet. Shout out to Joey Stadelman from Calgary. Guy is incredibly patient and also runs an actual play podcast. So I'll have to like find the name of that and plug it.
Did you of course couch it as like, don't worry, I've done your work for you. You can thank me later.
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's just like, yeah, no, I came up with my backstory and also a novel.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, I'm very into the like creation and tweaking and playing around with the world that we're inhabiting.
Yeah.
Uh, he told me later, actually, the DM that I was playing with Joey told me many years later that he had actually incorporated my character into a novel that he wrote.
Oh, there you go. So
And
it wasn't a wasted effort.
no, no, I think I deserve royalties. But yeah, so what is your usual approach to world building? Like, as somebody who is coming into it with an established lore already, how do you usually engage in world building?
um so given your definition of world building and how it could be they start from just like a single character, that's probably um my most common method of world building is finding, I'm not going to say I'm an infinitely creative person. I just have ADD. So I have a lot of dumb little ideas that kick around. And when I make a character, I want to do something new and unique with them that I haven't heard done before for the most part. So world building for me is mostly coming up with a very memorable character for one reason or another.
Okay.
So whether it's some goofball twist on his backstory or some unique thing about the race or class that hasn't been expressed before, I just like to put my own bizarre twist on it. So like with the most recent couple of characters, I so when I made the monk, I implied that he was able, like, that his high wisdom and insight made him able to like perceive weaknesses, which isn't like a thing in D&D. I just kind of declared that it was, right?
Right.
So there's that. I mean, there's what was it? I made funnily enough, I made another monk that I was thinking of before that one. And I just brought I modeled him after a famous Yokozuna, and I brought a version of sumo into that world.
Fantastic.
In the fighting pits, right? So yeah.
So in fiction writing circles, when we're discussing world building, there's really two approaches to it that we see, and these are also approaches that we see for like rule sets and all of this stuff. And I think we've talked about it a little bit in the past, and that's like top down or bottom up design. And so when you're starting with a single character, when you're starting with a single idea, like a smaller idea, that is world building that is bottom up. So you start with that idea, and then you take the next logical step.
Yeah, okay.
Right? The next logical step out. So some of my favorite examples of like what appear to me to be bottom up world building would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you have a very simple premise that vampires are real and a teenage girl needs to kill them.
Makes sense to me.
Right. Next step out from that is, okay, if vampires are real, what else is real?
Right.
Right. So do we have werewolves?
Yeah.
Yeah, ghosts. Are we throwing down with like bog monsters or aliens, right? Like which of these tropes are we going to engage with, and which ones are we going to leave aside? And then you can branch out even further than that. So like if monsters are real, what types of institutions are going to be involved with those monsters?
Men in Black.
Right, and in Buffy, we see that in the Watchers Council. We see that in Wolfram and Hart in the Angel series later, right? Like these organizations that are interacting with the monstrous in ways to like either raise it up or keep it under wraps or whatever it is that they want to do with that. Right, and then you start to think about like how is your normal life going to interact with those things, right? Like I think the charm of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is that she is going to high school, right? She has to deal with a bunch of high school problems. It's very much like the Peter Parker scenario of like, in so many ways, Buffy is just a normal person, and then also this shit.
Yeah, and then every once in a while she has to kick a vampire through a window or something.
Yeah. And you can see bottom-up design in like a few other, well, actually quite a few other world-building traits. So like the book that I read recently, the I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons, starts off with the idea that dragons exist and somebody has to kill them.
Okay. That could
That's
be me.
It could be you. We need an exterminator, somebody who kills dragons before they become a big problem.
Deal.
And so the entirety of that book takes place in like a small town, a castle, a country where we only see one city, and some mountainous terrain where a disaster happens. That's it. But because it is bottom up and because it's so character focused and because you have time to like breathe with those characters and like understand their motivations and like how this simple change of like there are dragons that exist and somebody has to kill them, how that impacts the way that they live their lives, the world feels very lived in. It feels very natural. So that's usually how I approach it if like as a DM, if I'm going to be working on my own setting, I will start with a relatively small idea.
Sure.
So, the campaign that I did previous to this one is what would Fantasy Australia be like?
Oh, I remember Fantasy Australia.
Yeah, Fantasy Australia. It's not a particularly highbrow idea. It's just, here is a continent full of stuff that wants to kill you on the regular. How would that be made worse by being in a fantasy world?
So let me ask you specifically about Fantasy Australia. So,
yeah.
For someone like myself, I would get to Fantasy Australia via the Bogan orcs, basically. I would be sitting there making myself laugh at something very stupid and build off of that. For you, did you start with I start with one group of people who are doing one stupid thing. It's a dumb joke and it makes me laugh. And then it's like, well, okay, if that's what these people are up to, what is the rest of the world up to? Right?
Right.
So for yourself, did you start with like the whole continent? And you're like, yes, this is all going to be Australia, and now I need to reskin all parts of Australia? Or did you start with like one thing? Like, what if the kangaroos were intelligent mob bosses or whatever happened there? I don't remember more details.
I started with the idea of the punishment of transportation.
Okay.
So, back in the day, if you were a problem in the United Kingdom and they wanted to get rid of you, they could just kill you, which would be mildly annoying, and they would have to like bury you or get rid of your body somehow. Or they could put your ass on a ship and send you somewhere else and make you that place's problem.
Yeah.
And so Australia, fairly famously, was the subject of the punishment of transportation. And it was actually a really interesting topic to research for me.
Yeah.
Where I was looking at like how transportation impacted the economy of early Australia, right?
Probably hugely beneficial, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And it was a source of cheap or free labor that would later integrate into the communities that they were working in, because you were transported for 7 years or something. After that 7 years, you can't afford a boat back to the UK. You just live in Australia now. Yeah,
I was going to say, like, there's no way that working some basically slave labor job was going to get you enough money to be able to go home. It says, well, I guess I'm Australian now.
Yeah. So the concept for me was like, if my player characters were transported to Australia,
right?
What is the sort of bullshit that adventurers would get up to in Fantasy Australia?
Okay.
Right? Like what type of tasks would they be given? And it was mostly just like, clear the hex, right? Yeah. We have two tribes that don't like each other and hate us more that are nearby. Please go get rid of that problem.
Yeah.
Right. And it was going to expand out from there. Like a lot of the ideas for like characters and stuff, like we had the idea of half orcs not actually being half orcs, but being like pygmy orcs.
Yeah.
That came out of just like a brainstorming session with a player whose character died. And
Gotcha.
He wanted a way to like work his character in. And so we just made a tribe of pygmy orcs that live native to Australia. And he was out on a like journey of self-discovery, right? Whatever his like manhood journey was going to be. Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time to really flesh that one out.
Yeah, fair.
We hit a TPK in session 3.
Oops.
But yeah, that's where it came from, was just the idea of transportation and like how that would interact with a fantasy world.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you did something with half orcs that was like a variant on them. I did a similar thing with my paladin. I just was playing with the phrasing of half an orc. What does half an orc mean? Right. And that built the idea into the world that like because I don't think there's any precedent for this. Don't quote me on that. But I don't think there's any sort of precedent for the idea of like reanimated constructs that are like a plural amalgamation. If that makes sense.
I think Mary Shelley wrote a book about it.
Well,
once.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, Frankenstein does not exist in ye old Dungeons and Dragons, as far as I know.
No, I do think that like there is a flesh golem variant that is pretty specifically like the amalgamation of a bunch of
the Frankenstein's
people, but it isn't
monster.
Like, yeah, it's a Frankenstein's monster, but it isn't intelligent. I don't think.
Okay.
I think it's just a golem. But I would have to research it. So again, don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think that the idea of doing a Frankenstein that is half an orc and half a bunch of other things is both hilarious and deeply disturbing.
Well, I don't know what to tell you because that's one of my longest running characters ever.
But it's a neat idea, and that lends itself to other bottom-up world building, right? Like, if there is a person or persons or group that is able to make a half-orc in your phrasing of the term, what else are they up to? Right? What other creatures have they created? Have they created any? Are they doing, like, chimeric creatures for a reason? Is this considered a form of necromancy? Or
and that's what we explored.
Science?
Was like he was pissed and trying to find his creator, and then we found out that this creator wasn't exactly the world's brightest necromancer. He was just kind of an opportunist and didn't have a good source of materials except for a battlefield. So it turns out that living creatures are a little more homogenous than we realized.
And then the other option for world building is to go top down. And I feel like this is what we see a lot more with the published setting spaces.
Right.
So like Dark Sun has a grand idea. Right? It actually has a couple of grand ideas that are at play at the same time. So one is we are on a desert world.
Yes.
How does being in a desert impact normal D&D play? Well, obviously it is more brutal. Resource management becomes a lot more important. We have a differing type of creature that we're working with. Like, they're going to have to be creatures that are able to deal with the desert sun. And then the other big one that they interact with quite a bit is the lack of magic.
Yes.
There is no magic in Dark Sun.
Yes.
Or at least, usually there isn't, because I'm sure there's somebody out there who has a magical character in Dark Sun.
Okay, so having spent a lot of time in Dark Sun, there is magic in Dark Sun. However,
yes,
Dark Sun magic is derived from a different source. And that, I think, is some of the most interesting change on their magic system, where you want to cast a spell, that's great, but that it takes like life force that has to come from somewhere. And that's what caused the Dark Sun. And obviously, people are going to feel a certain way about that. And, how are you going to inhabit that world as a magic user person?
See, I find it interesting that the origin of Dark Sun is also a little bit the origin of the League of Legends world.
Right.
Right. A wizard fucked stuff up so bad. we had to come up with something that did different magic so that we didn't have to deal with that again.
I would choose to phrase it the other way, that like League of Legends cribbed from Dark Sun, but whatever.
Oh no, I don't think either of them cribbed from either. I think it's a case of parallel design, but I do think it's kind of funny.
That, yeah.
Wizards fucking shit up is a long and proud tradition in game lore.
Yep.
So yeah, the book that I've been reading is very much a top-down design.
Yeah.
It's got a big idea of what if raccoons were the dominant species on the planet.
Right.
And then starts to narrow down from there, right? Like you have that big idea, and then you have to start thinking about like what are the far-reaching impacts of that change.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for this world, civilization and intelligent life started in North America.
Right.
Right. We have only just recently discovered Africa, because life started in North America. There are no horses that have been tamed. Everything is llamas.
I actually like that change.
Me too. And you have like different breeds of llamas that are used for different purposes, very similar to the way that we have different breeds of horses. The materials that are used for building are local.
Okay. Yeah, they can't travel as far because they don't have the means to do it.
Yeah, they have like llama-drawn wagons, but llamas don't have the same type of endurance that a horse does. And so the range of travel that you have within the same time frame is lower. So like those types of decisions where you're looking at it from like a bird's eye view, and you have like this big sweeping change, and then you start like layering down until you start getting to like the personal aspects of that change. That's very top-down design.
Right.
And one thing that I think it's important to keep in mind is that like all of these changes don't necessarily need to be like logical.
Right.
But they do need to be consistent.
Yes. They need to be internally consistent, not externally consistent.
Yeah. So like I feel like there is a lot of external consistency in the Architect of Sleep, where it's just like, these are things that we know about raccoons that we can extrapolate.
Right.
Right. There isn't anything in there where it's like, well, no, there are a couple of things. So like, one thing that does kind of break immersion for me is that one of the main characters has dream magic, essentially.
Oh, that's annoying.
Everything else about this society has been pretty logical.
Yeah.
It's an educated guess about what an evolved raccoon would be like.
Right.
But then we've also got dream magic.
Which, yeah. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with having magic in your fantasy setting, but that's
it's kind of expected.
Established up till now, right?
It's established very early. I think it's established in like chapter 2. That the main raccoon character was expecting not a human, but a stranger from a faraway place. Because she had had a true dream about somebody appearing who was going to help her. Which is why she takes him in and turns him into like a weird hairless monkey pet.
That's me.
So they I mean, both of us are pretty hairy monkey pets. At least on the face region.
Yeah. Face-wise, yes. The rest of me, smooth like an otter.
Yeah, I'm a manatee. It's just...
It's those blonde Viking genes that just all the hairs on the head and face, and the rest is just more or less non-existent.
That's where the rhyme is, right? So you gotta keep that off your face. Yeah. Actually, speaking of otters and manatees, one of the other interesting changes in the book, and one of the earliest signs that the main character is somewhere else, is that he starts seeing flora and fauna around that hasn't been near his hometown for quite a while. So, like, he's from Florida.
Yeah.
And he sees a Florida panther. And there's like
wait, those don't exist.
Yeah, there's like 100 of them.
Yeah.
And so, like, running into one, what are the fucking chances of that? And then he, like, gets down to the river and he sees manatees playing in the river. But the, like, there was an invasive species of plant that we brought over from Europe.
Yeah.
That has been taking over manatee waters, and it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right, so, like, a whole bunch of, like, the cause and effect of humans was taken out. And they're small details, right? Like, that's the thing that I love the most about this, is, like, it is very top-down world building, where, like, we have this grand idea and we start whittling it down, but those tiny details, man, they're what sell it.
Yeah, fair.
So, like, that I think is the thing that I'm going to be taking away for, like, my role-playing game stuff.
Oh, okay.
Right, it's just, like, those tiny, tiny details that, like, add so much to this world.
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking for those a bit more.
Awesome.
Right, because there are a few that I lean on. Filigree? I'm a big fan of filigree.
Why filigree?
Because it's pretty.
It is
like,
pretty.
It immediately signifies that something is fancy.
If it wasn't fancy, they wouldn't have taken all this time to write fancy with it.
Right, exactly. If they didn't want it to be fancy and beautiful, then they would not have taken the time to, like, carefully carve filigree into a thing.
True.
Yeah. But, like, let's take a quick look at specifically Spelljammer.
Okay.
So Spelljammer, to me, has never been a particularly well fleshed out setting.
No.
It is a setting between settings. You are supposed to use it to get from adventure place A to adventure place B and have something that's kind of cool and unique in the middle.
Correct.
In a lot of ways, it reminds me of, like, Planescape.
Yes.
But less detailed. Like, Planescape, I think, is actually one of the better examples of world building that we've seen for interstitial spaces.
Okay.
But for Spelljammer, I keep forgetting the name. For Spelljammer, you have big, wide open spaces.
Yeah.
And you have little sections of populace that are in there. So if you were going to change a thing in Spelljammer, if you were going to, like, add world building detail to Spelljammer, what do you think would be, like, your first go-to for that?
Okay. To my mind, now keep in mind I don't play Spelljammer specifically a whole lot, maybe once or twice. The first thing I want is, like, permanence, some sort of fixture that helps center the setting. So I know there's, like, races, I think, that are, like, specific to that, like, space between spaces, you know?
Hippo people.
Yeah, the hippo dudes. But I want, like, in the way that, like, what is it? There's that city that sort of centers all of, like, Plane Chase. Shoot, what's the name of it?
Sigil.
Sigil, that's the one. There's no sigil in Plane Chase, right?
Well, Plane Chase has Sigil, but
Or sorry,
Spelljammer does
in Spelljammer.
Yeah.
Right?
No, not really.
So some sort of like centralized fixture, I think, helps establish some sort of like stability and consistency.
I think you can actually get to Sigil from Spelljammer Space.
I'm sure you can, but
Like, I am vaguely remembering that there were some campaigns that I played in where Sigil was almost like the DS9 of our
right.
Spelljammer campaign, where like we had all of these ships and they would come into Sigil, and then sometimes somebody would get lost in a door and we would have to go and find them. So like that could be a way around it, I guess, is you could make Sigil like your main space station of operations.
You could, but we're talking about not just like stealing from somewhere.
No, we're building world. Okay, so maybe that would be an interesting like place to take from. Would be like Star Trek Deep Space Nine had a centralized location that they were doing their storytelling from.
Right.
And that was like the big space station. So maybe Spelljammer needs more space stations.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Mostly I'm just playing to your love of DS9.
That's me. You know me so well. Yeah, no, I mean, you need something not unlike a space station. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's got to be some sort of collecting point for all the weirdos of the galaxy.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I think for me, I would be maybe not moving in a specific location direction.
Okay.
But I do feel like there's a dearth of organizations. Right? So like Star Trek makes a lot of sense because you've got these warring factions. Right? You have your Federation, your like beacon of democracy and utopia, and then you've got your Romulans, you got your Klingons, you got your like free species that are running around, the Ferengis and the Cardassians and whatnot. But having the Federation and Star Trek grounds the entire series, like all of the series, in expectations. Right? So like you have rules that you have to follow, you have people that you have to answer to, you have specific places that you need to protect, but not necessarily they're going to be your home base. Right? But I guess I don't know. I guess in like Next Generation, Voyager, we're not going to talk about Discovery.
Never even heard of it.
Strange New Worlds. The ship is kind of the thing you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess in that case, maybe running a bit more in the direction of like world building, but the world is just the ship.
Yeah, maybe. But like, see, for my mind, I would want like some sort of constant giant mothership that everyone is sort of, beholden to or comes to for some reason. Like I want a reason for people from a bunch of different settings or from a bunch of different areas to come together in the middle of this like nothing void. To draw everyone to sort of this centralized hub, the Quark's bar or whatever.
Man, the lack of interesting space stations in Star Trek is kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, and we know that they exist. Like DS is like, are they trying to say that the only people who make interesting space stations are the Romulans?
It was Cardassian built, but
Cardassian, sorry.
I think that like okay, so DS9 I think worked largely because we were seeing the Federation deal with stuff that was very specifically non-Federation.
Right.
Right. They were on a ship that was designed by a different species, so we got rid of all of the like smooth, clean lines and the like soft carpets in the hallways, and instead we had like open grates and like chunks of metal and stuff in a language that nobody could read.
Right.
It
was like hostile architecture.
Yeah. And then like the situations that they were in, like Bajor isn't a Federation planet. So you're having to like negotiate with the Bajorans at the same time that you're trying to negotiate with the Cardassians, at the same time that you're dealing with the fact that a giant blue hole just opened in the sky and a whole bunch of shapeshifters are coming out of it.
Right.
Like, all of that is so far outside of the Federation's norm.
Yeah.
That I think that's what really pushed DS9 to work.
Mm-hmm.
Every other space station that we've seen is just so boring.
Yeah.
Like, it's a spinning disk where you have one, maybe two scientists working.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how many of these space stations have we seen where it's just like some eccentric guy and his like arm candy assistant?
Yep.
In like a place that might be orbiting a star or may just be in deep space, doing some like absolutely horrific experiment for no good reason. That's every fucking space station in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Except DS9.
Yeah, because it's not Federation.
It's not Federation. So, all right. Well, I think I'm going to steal that, and I'm going to have to make like a DS9 location somewhere in my Spelljammer game.
Hey, works for me.
And I'll let you know how the world building goes as we go.
Perfect.
Hey, thanks for making it all the way through this episode of No Plot Only Lore. If you're looking for more, you can always find us at noplotonlylore.com and on all the very best podcast platforms. If you like what you heard today, please share, rate, and review the show to feed my never-ending need for attention and validation.